LA Kings fans continue to float trade proposals. I clarify my position on a Kings rebuild, and I look to stay perfect in answering Kings trivia questions and more on another fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. It is time for our weekly fan feedback show, your chance to express yourself on anything involving our LA Kings. Maybe you want to react to one of our shows from the past week, ask a question you need answered, or just share something you feel like sharing about our favorite hockey team. We will begin with Go Big or Go Home Keith. He is still in parts unknown. And he says, first off, I agree with virtually all you said about Gretzky going to LA and the reasons why. But my point is that the team more than survived, even if they were just for a few more seasons. I think he's talking about the Oilers. Messier, arguably the second best player in their history, was also traded, and the Oilers still went to the semifinals in 92. No, it did not last, but my point is the same as above. Secondly, we'll have to agree to disagree regarding the cost on getting a center like Matt Barzal. Again, as much as I like him, he's not nearly on the scale of a McDavid, Draisaitl, or McKinnon. Overall, he averages 65 to 70 points. He has an injury history, which may bring down his stock a tad as well. While he's a capable first-line center and would be with the Kings, he wouldn't be on many other teams, especially elite ones. So I don't believe it would cost the team a King's ransom to acquire him, as you claim, pardon the pun. You keep overrating him because he's a big fish in a small pond with the New York Islanders. Thirdly, last week you forgot to address my view on the Kings likely to miss the 2027 playoffs based on what I said. Between the team still badly needing a frontline center and another top 4 D-man, along with promising teams like San Jose and Chicago likely to get much better, I don't like our chances. What are your thoughts on that? Finally, this may be revisionist history, but let's play that game anyway if it's all the same. In hindsight, should the Kings have traded Bernie Nichols, given how great he played with Gretzky, especially on the power play? Yes, the team got back 2 very good wingers in Tomas Sandstrom and Tony Granato, who played well for the team, including helping them to upset heavily favored Stanley Cup champion Calgary in the first round of the 1990 playoffs. But the team still lost a great number 2 center, and I think that hurt them long term. And at the very least, shouldn't the Kings have attempted to trade back to Edmonton and make him available in the early 2029-23 season? Or 1992-93 season. And that was a lot from Go Big or Go Home, Keith. Well, the Oilers more than survived after trading Gretzky because they had like 6 other Hall of Famers on their roster. It wasn't because they traded Gretzky and somehow restocked the organization. So I'm still not really understanding your comparison between what the Oilers did and you're proposing that the Kings should have traded Kopitar and Doughty a few years after winning the Cup. I don't see the comparison there. But we move on. I never compared Matt Barzal to McDavid, Draisaitl, or McKinnon. But it doesn't matter that he's not as good as those players. What matters is he's a good top 6 center, and those players are extremely hard to come by. That's why the price for somebody like him is still going to be high, because you can't get those guys. As for the Kings making the playoffs or not this season, I do think the Sharks are going to be better. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think the Ducks may not be a playoff team this year. They've got a lot of issues defensively, and they still haven't re-signed Cutter Gauthier. That looks like it's going to be a mess. So I think the Ducks may be sliding out of the playoff picture. The Oilers and the Golden Knights will still be there. You mentioned the Blackhawks. I think they're still going to stink. They're still years away. But I think the Sharks and Kings will be in contention for 3rd in the Pacific. And I think the Kings are a bubble team to get into the postseason. I think they'll probably be battling with a team like Utah for a wild card if it comes to that. So they're, like I said, they're a bubble team for the playoffs, I believe. So they could fall short and just miss out, or they could sneak in again like they have the last few years. As for your last point on the Bernie Nichols trade, honestly, that was before my time as a Kings fan, so I don't feel comfortable really getting into that. I don't recall a lot of people talking about that being an awful trade for the Kings. I think Tomas Sandstrom and Tony Granato were pretty good players. If Nichols stays, are the fortunes of the Kings much different? I don't think so. But like I said, I can't really get into that because that was a little bit before my time as a Kings fan. Aaron in Winnipeg checks in. He says, I just finished watching your fan feedback show. We had talked about potential trades. You brought up the Alexander Nikishin trade and how the Hurricanes would only trade him if the trade included Jesperi Kotkaniemi. I have two thoughts on this. Number one, would that necessarily be a bad thing? He's a 6'4" centerman making just under $5 million a year for 4 more years. He's 26. So the thinking at this point in his career is usually what you see is what you get. However, my thoughts are that maybe a change of scenery might do him some good. A different situation, a different coaching philosophy, and a different voice from teammates could turn out to be the right situation, and he could turn into that second C. Having him play the 2C would also keep both Kempe and Laferriere on the wings where they're both comfortable. If it doesn't work out, he can become a buyout candidate in 2 years with a cap hit going up. The way it is, the cap hit would be small in comparison. Plus, we would inject some much-needed skill and youth into our left side of our defense. Thought number two, the Carolina side of things. Now, I'm obviously no GM, so this would be spitballing at best. What would we give the Canes? Well, the first player that comes to mind is Alex Turcotte. He could use a change of scenery himself. His contract doesn't move the needle salary-wise, but he would open up a roster spot. Plus, he could be their reclamation project. The second player would be either Dumoulin or Edmondson. If we have to take Kotkaniemi, they would have to take one of those two. This would both open up a roster spot and help with the salary cap. I also wonder if they would be willing to add Kemper at 50% retained. They do have their tandem in net, but they are young and might need some insurance. There would probably need to be some picks and or prospects involved, but that's deeper into my GM experience. Let me know what you think. And as always, go Kings go. Aaron in Winnipeg. Well, Aaron, I think the two issues, I don't think your trade proposal is crazy, but I do think there are two issues with it. Number one, I don't think Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a top 6 forward. And I get the whole change of scenery thing. We hear that a lot, but I don't see him as a top 6 center. And obviously that's would be one of the keys to taking him back or taking him in. I don't know that he's a better option than moving Alex Laferriere or Adrian Kempe to center. Alex Turcotte would be the other issue. I think his trade value is very low. He is at best a bottom 6 depth player at this point. So I don't see him being someone that the Hurricanes would want. I think they would probably want somebody like an Alex Laferriere. If they're going to give up a player like Alexander Nikishin, they're going to want someone of that caliber in return. So those would be the two issues that I would have with that trade. If you included Laferriere instead of Turcotte, would you make that trade, Aaron? I think that's something you might have to consider because we definitely need help defensively, and he's a young player, Nikishin, that we could have for many, many years. Of course, you got to re-sign him to a pretty long-term deal as well. But and we've got depth on the wing, so that would be something that I think would be a little bit more realistic. Dave in Seattle checks in. He says, really enjoyed your conversation with Nick Nixon last week and the discussion of the Gretzky trade. It brought back some great memories. I started attending Kings games the season before the trade. My father worked for a local television station and had access to seats at the Forum. Back then, everyone wanted the Lakers tickets, but the Kings tickets often went unused. Fortunately for me, that meant I got to attend quite a few games. There was something mysteriously cool about the Forum on Kings nights. Hockey was this sport that almost nobody in LA seemed to know or care about. Being a Kings fan felt like belonging to an underground club. The players had missing teeth, flattened noses, and looked like they just come off from a street fight. It was gritty, strange, and completely different from everything else in LA sports, and I loved it. Then Gretzky arrived. I certainly wasn't mad about getting the greatest player in the world, but strangely, I remember being a little disappointed. My underground sport was suddenly going mainstream, and I worried that some of what made it special might disappear. Of course, the opposite happened. The Forum filled up, the Kings became relevant, and hockey suddenly mattered in Los Angeles. Instead of losing interest, I fell even more in love with the sport and the team. I pretty much watched or listened to every Kings game since the 1988-89 season. Keep up the great work, Eddie. And that was from Dave in Seattle. I love it, Dave. Good to share your story of how you became a Kings fan. I'm very, very similar. Although I will say this, as someone who has worked in mainstream sports for a long time, I still feel like being a hockey fan is like being a part of some club that a lot of people either don't know about or don't care to know about. So I kind of still have that feeling. Although I'm sure it was much different. I understand exactly where you're coming from, but I still think being a hockey fan is kind of off the grid and still cool in that way. We have Gary in Lompoc, Lompoc, Lompoc. I'm I don't know. Lompoc, right? Lompoc. I've heard it both ways. Come out of my mouth. Greg says, as a longtime Kings fan, I think you may have missed the real reason Wayne Gretzky came to Los Angeles. Gretzky married supermodel and LA resident Janet Jones in July of 1988. In August, he's traded. It was it was his decision based on some very serious motivation. Without this, the trade never happens, in my opinion. Money and X's and O's can't always explain everything. Thanks for the great job you do and the interesting way to stay connected during the summer. And that was Greg in Lompoc. Now I know Janet Jones, Gretzky, was thought of, especially by those north of the border, as the Yoko Ono of the Oilers, and that she was, responsible for breaking up the Beatles. She wasn't. Gretzky was going to be traded one way or another because he was traded because the Oilers owner needed money. That's why he was traded. Now, did Janet Jones maybe help steer Wayne away from Detroit or Vancouver and to LA because of her career? That's possible. It's possible that maybe he comes to LA because of her, but he was going to be traded regardless. 100%. The trade did not happen because of Janet Jones. It was happening regardless, but maybe LA because of her a little bit. Tom in Saginaw, Michigan says, did you ever meet or interact with David Courtney? If so, any stories to share? Do you know if there is anywhere in the Toyota Center or Crypto.com arena that has a tribute to him? If not, there should be. Thank you and great job as always. That was Tom in Saginaw, Michigan. Interesting name to bring up, Tom. I wonder if maybe you had a connection to David Courtney. I actually did know David. If you don't know, he was the former Kings public address announcer for many years. Unfortunately, passed away in 2012 after the Kings won their Stanley Cup. So he was around to hear that. And his voice will always be eternally announcing, ladies and gentlemen, the Stanley Cup, I think was the kind of the famous line he said. So back in the day, my wife was an acquaintance with his girlfriend at the time. And me being a big Kings fan and my wife at the time being a big Angels fan, we got introduced to David because he was the public address announcer for the Angels and the Kings. And so very nice guy. His girlfriend also lived in Mission Viejo where we lived at the time. I think she was kind of a neighbor in a way. So anyway, we got connected with him and he gave us tickets often to Kings and Angels games, which was very nice of him. And I very vividly remember he introduced me to Bob Miller for the first time down in the bowels of Staples Center at the time. Very nice guy, very fondly remembered, gone way too early. So yes, I did know David Courtney a little bit and had some good memories for sure. All right, coming up next, I want to clarify my thoughts on a Kings rebuild. We'll do that next here on Locked In LA Kings, your team every day. Locked On LA Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a homer today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick on who you think will hit a home run in their game. And if you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day through the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's games, whether you're following your favorite team or keeping an eye on matchups across the league. Every game has someone capable of going deep, and now you get your chance to make your prediction before the first pitch. Someone is hitting a home run. You want to check guys who are on hot streaks, a favorable pitching matchup, or maybe even a ballpark that gives up a lot of home runs. Those are the things I look for when I make my daily dingers selection. So are you ready to play your game today? Join all the action at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a homer. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, the official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, back to the emails. Steve in Ventura checking in. He says, first off, talking about the Athletic Kings fan survey, I wish they would have given an option of undecided when it comes to GM Ken Holland. He's only been on the job for just over a year. Granted, CC's contract is bad and Dumoulin's is almost as bad, but we don't know what he was told when he was hired. For all we know, he was told that Jim Hiller is not allowed to be fired and he needs to give Hiller what he feels will make the team more successful. That's pretty much what Holland said last summer. He said that's why he moved Spence and why he then replaced him with big veteran players that Hiller would play in the playoffs. Obviously, that didn't work, and now he's moved on to a new coach and is making moves that he believes will fit with that coach's system. Again, mistakes have been made, but it seems to me that he did what he could in a few months that he had prior to last season to give Hiller what he wanted, and I can't say I blame him. It's a joke now in hindsight, but Hiller did have a 105-point season, so I can see why everyone wanted to give him another shot with what he thought would work. Now is really the time I'll decide if I'm confident in Ken Holland. Since last summer, it's been pretty good. Only extending Panarin for 2 years is good. All these short-term deals on veterans is good. Not extending Doughty yet is good. He's setting up the team to maybe win now, but also to be able to move on and rebuild around the young core in a year or two. Now we'll see if he can improve the center position and the defense during the season, assuming 2 or 3 of the slow guys will not be able to perform in Laviolette's system. What worries me most is what's happening in the background. We hear lots of positive talk from the players, but Kelly Cheeseman left management. Vladislav Gavrikov didn't extend because, according to Dennis Bernstein, they wouldn't give him a 7th year. And maybe it was just a coach issue, but Deneau and Fogle asked to be traded. Also, years ago, they let Mike Fuda and Mike Smothers go from the Reign. All good culture guys, in my opinion. It feels like, to me, ownership or upper management is focused on money more than culture and winning, but I think we'll soon see how everyone handles the post-Kopitar years. Then I'll decide if I'm confident. Sorry for being long-winded today, and that was Steve in Ventura. It's all fair to say you're still waiting to see more as far as Ken Holland goes in grading or judging his time as GM. But as an old radio friend of mine used to say, they asked me to give my opinion now, not in a year or two. So that survey was asking people their opinion now. But ultimately, yeah, he'll be judged when it's all said and done. I think so far, Ken Holland's tenure has been a bit of a mixed bag. Average, I would say at this point. Some good moves, some not so good moves. I would be surprised if Ken Holland took the job and was told, you have to keep this coach or you have to trade this player. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. Yes, he still has a boss in Luc Robitaille and obviously Kings ownership, but I don't see a guy like him taking that job and not having a major say in how the team is structured. Now, certainly he could have taken advice, especially taking the job kind of on short notice, maybe leaning on some people who have been there already before, he kind of gets his view of things firsthand. So that's possible. But I find it hard to believe you hire a Ken Holland and then you just tell him what to do. As for, player and management movement, I'm not sure that there's a big statement one way or another on that. I think there's movement in all organizations when it comes to people and management and certainly players. The Mike Fuda thing, I don't know this, but my feel is that, he was a Dean Lombardi hire. He stuck around when Dean Lombardi left, and I think he thought he was in line to be the next Kings GM and probably wasn't real happy that Rob Blake got the job over him. And I think he decided at that point that he needed to move on to try and get a GM job somewhere else. It hasn't worked out for him. He's now working in media, but that's my feel on what happened with Mike Fuda. Gary in Orange checks in. He says, earlier in the week, I watched your Kings survey episode. Towards the end of that episode, I had to do a double take and listen twice to something you said. Did I correctly hear you say that you are now in favor of trading everyone on the current roster except Byfield, Kempe, Clark, and Laferriere? Wouldn't that be a borderline full rebuild? You've been opposed to a rebuild when some fans have brought it up because it would be 6 to 8 years of misery. It seems like you have suddenly changed your mind, or did I misinterpret what you said? I would be very opposed to trading everyone off the roster except for the 4 players mentioned. Although I don't think we are anywhere close to being a cup contender, I do think this roster could potentially go deep into the postseason if we could somehow add an under 30-year-old top 6 center and an impact defenseman. Even if the odds of those 2 transactions are slim, it's still better to hunt for them than to trade 95% of the roster. And that was Gary in Orange. Okay, let me kind of clarify where I stand on this. I'm not opposed to the Kings deciding after this season that they need to do a major retool or rebuild. I certainly haven't demanded it on the show. But I think unless something pretty big happens this year, now that we've moved on from Andre Kopitar, and now that it seems like maybe Drew Doughty's career could be coming to an end, I think it's time for the Kings to start to seriously move towards building for the future rather than this constant pattern we see. Look, I like making the playoffs. I know that if you get in, you have a chance. But again, even you said, Gary, this team is not a cup contender, and the odds of them actually going out and landing some big, top 6 center that's going to come in and kind of really change things is slim. Now, I'm not saying you don't try for it, and maybe that happens this year, but after this year, if they miss the playoffs or it's another quick one and done, I'm ready to start to move on and reset and send off pieces and keep the core and build around them. J-Dog in Spring Valley, which is east of San Diego, according to the internet, says, hoping you and your family are great. Thank you, J-Dog. I have salary and cap-related questions that may be more suited for your Locked On NHL podcast, but is also relevant to the Kings. First, what would compel any management to accept a no movement clause with no way of getting out from under an underachieving player unless the player agrees? This seems like a suicide pill. If he is underachieving, no team would want his rights anyway. A full no trade clause is nearly as bad. I can understand the value of a partial no trade clause as the player gets a say and the organization has some options. There is another interesting take I've heard on other podcasts. Massive contracts like the one just signed by Leo Carlson actually hamstring a franchise so severely that it's a virtual guarantee of not winning a cup. When you have more than 6.5 of your cap space tied up in one player and 22 other roster players who need to be paid, it definitely limits your options. By way of comparison, when looking at the last cup winner, the Canes and the Cats, there are no players getting a sixth of the team's cap. Barkov is at $10 million for Florida, and everyone else is below that, with the Canes even more frugal. I don't blame players for getting all they can, but I wonder if some of this is due to their agents wanting a feather in their cap and loading up their resume. Responsible players should also look at the big picture, like their team's needs and their quest for the cup. What is clear is that the best teams are building the strongest from top to bottom. I'd appreciate your thoughts that you have. Sorry to be long-winded. Break it up into 2 shows if you have to. Love the show. Keep up the good work. That was J-Dog in Spring Valley. I agree 100% with you. I am not giving out no movement or no trade clauses. And I think general managers across the league are seriously rethinking handing these things out like they're candy. They absolutely restrict you. It's a terrible idea unless you're locking up a future Hall of Famer or somebody who's a major piece of your rebuild, like Macklin Celebrini. You give that guy anything he wants. But the reason why they do it is that typically, if you give a player a no move or a no trade, you do that in exchange for him taking less money. Well, maybe he takes $1 million less so that he can have a no trade or a no move. And GMs in the past have been willing to make that trade-off so they can have more cap space to pay other players. I think they're starting to rethink that strategy. Carolina is certainly a good example of a team without a superstar. It is possible to win a cup without one of those super players, but it isn't easy. You got to have a really deep team and a lot of guys contributing. When you look at, I think Minnesota right now with that Kirill Kaprizov contract is certainly finding out how difficult that's making things. But you look at, what Connor McDavid did with the Oilers, where he took a team-friendly deal, a short deal, at least for now, because he knows that there needs to be money available to add pieces and to help the Oilers' chances of winning a cup. And I know he's getting paid. He's going to get paid. He'll make his money when it's all said and done, but he obviously wants to win a cup because he doesn't want to be labeled as, the best player who never won a Stanley Cup. I know that's certainly important to him and his legacy. Mike Hale in Santa Monica checks in. And Mike, I did read your entire email. Thank you for all the time you put into it, but I think you understand that I did have to edit a lot of it down to fit into the show. Hopefully I will hit on your major points. And by the way, love your birthday. Mike says, longtime listener, first time emailer. Confession time. This past spring, I made the tough decision to not renew my season tickets to the LA Kings. I've been a proud season ticket holder since 2010. I witnessed both cup wins from my seats in 318 row 12, center ice as far back as one can go without being in the media booth. I, like many Kings fans, would agree those were two of the best moments of my life. When I informed my Kings representative I would not be renewing my season tickets, she simply asked why, and I said, "How much time do you have?" At the end of the day, I told her I'm canceling because this team is simply unwatchable. Now, I realize this was last year's team, and this was even before the trade for Panarin, which I'll admit made them slightly more fun to watch. But I'm sure you can agree as well with many other Kings fans, majority of last year's games were a snooze fest. Which brings me to my thought. Was the greatest of Kopitar and Doughty a factor to why the Kings are in the position they are in? Look at the previous powerhouse franchises from the mid-2010s, Chicago and Pittsburgh. Now, Pitt has played the same long game with their superstars, and I'd argue for the same reason. Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, all still playing at a high level, and none of them being moved. Chicago, could you imagine telling a Blackhawks fan after the 2015 Cup win with Kane, Taves, Keith, Seabrook, and Crawford, they'd all be gone in the next few years? Exactly. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. Turcotte was projected to be a top six forward. He'll be lucky to crack the bottom six. Byfield, who knows? The PLD trade set this franchise back probably a decade. I was talking amongst the Kings circles that the PLD trade was insurance at center because Byfield wasn't progressing the way the Kings had hoped. The problem is for PLD to be effective as a player, he needs to play 1C, and that was never going to happen with Kopitar in the mix unless it was brought to Kopitar that he needed to step down and play a smaller role at 2C to set up the franchise for the future. Maybe. Then maybe PLD could have been successful, but we'll never know. So long story short, too late. My apologies. I asked the question, were Kopitar's and Doughty's greatness a reason the Kings are in the position they are in right now? Thanks for your time. That was Mike in Santa Monica. Well, Mike, I would say with most things, there's usually not one reason. There are multiple reasons, and certainly you did touch on them a bit. I know you talked about some of the drafting as well, not being successful. I guess my way of looking at it is if Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty, the two best players at their position in franchise history, members of the two Stanley Cup winning teams and future Hall of Famers, if them holding on to their positions a bit longer than they should have is detrimental to the team at this point, fine. I'm okay with it. I'm not. I mean, I think there's. Do I think that both of those players could have taken a bit of a step back earlier than they did to maybe help things? I think it's possible. But again, I also, for me personally, what they've given to the organization, their status in franchise history, I'm fine with it. If that's the price we have to pay for having those two guys on the team, it could be a part of it. But I don't think that alone is the answer to the question of why the Kings are where they are, being this middle of a pack team that, makes the playoffs, but doesn't do anything once they get there. So that would be my answer to that. It could have played a factor, but if it did, for me personally, I'm okay with it because of all they've given to me as a Kings fan. Also, I would say, Mike, thanks for adding the video that you did of the Kings Canucks thing. I'm gonna definitely check that out. So thanks for sharing that. All right, I'm gonna look to continue my undefeated streak in answering Kings trivia. That's next. You're on Locked In LA Kings, your team every day. Our next email comes from Scott in Simi Valley here on this Kings fan feedback show. He says, nice summary of the Kings' first 10 years. It was a colorful decade to be a Kings fan, and most players had cool nicknames. So I'll mention Bill Cowboy Flett, Juha Whiting to go along with Captain Crunch for Jules Marat. Gary Sargent was my sister's favorite player. She thought he was good looking. He's also a cousin of TJ Oshie and was a solid, tough, and reliable D-man. Marat gave the foreign boards a workout with his crunching body checks, and Butch Goring was a blast to watch. Every time Goring got a breakaway, and he got them a lot, it was in the net. The 74-75 season under Bob Pulford was fantastic, with Pulford being one of the best coaches, Kings coaches ever. Pulley had quite a playing career with Toronto, then played for the Kings for a couple of seasons before coaching them for 5 and winning the Jack Adams Award in that outstanding 74-75 season. When the Kings got Marcel Dion in 1975, they lost my favorite player, Dan Maloney, and steady D-man Terry Harper, who was already a 5-time Cup winner with Montreal, as compensation to Detroit, which I was really pissed off about. Maloney was an extremely hard-nosed left winger playing on Butch Goring's line, who had just had his best season with 27 goals and 39 assists for 66 points, 165 penalty minutes, and was a plus 28. Losing Maloney and Harper infuriated Pulford and ruined the championship team chemistry that Pulley was building. There were plenty of other characters too, like Don Crazy Cozy Kozak, a speedy winger who still holds the NHL record for fastest goal to start a Stanley Cup playoff game, 6 seconds against Boston. Cozy also loved to spray opposing goalies with snow. Enforcer Dave Hutchinson had many memorable heavyweight bouts with the league's toughest. It was Hutch and Mike Corrigan who carried Goring off the ice on their shoulders after Goring's famous overtime game winner versus the Bruins in Game 6 of the 1976 quarterfinals. I believe that was the one and only time in NHL history that has happened. One thing you could say about the Kings back then, they always were the kings of entertaining their fans. The Forum crowds in the 60s and 70s were electric. By the way, Nick Nixon's Kings Legends series YouTube video with Goring, Harper, and Kozak, which Nick taped about 5 years ago, is an absolute must for anyone who really wants to know how awesome Kings hockey was back then. It's a great one. Thanks for all the memories, Eddie, and go Kings go. And that was Scott in Simi Valley. Scott, good stuff. I always appreciate learning about the history of the LA Kings. I'm going to check out that Kings Legends series on YouTube that you mentioned. You talked about a player being carried off the ice. I do remember it happening once, not that long ago, and it was a former Kings player that it happened to. Now, he wasn't playing for the Kings at the time, but Marian Gaborik had a 5-goal game for the Minnesota Wild, and I remember them carrying him off the ice on their shoulders. So that's the only other time I remember that happening in hockey. But I do remember the image or the video of Butch Goring being carried off the ice. Ruben Guzzi Gabriel in West Covina checks in. He says, every day you're here, Eddie. Just wanted to throw my 2 cents in regarding some color on the Kings uniforms. I definitely agree that having some sort of royal purple or gold outlining of the crown or down the sides of the players' pants would look exponentially better. Our uniforms need some color on them. Ontario Reign changed their look for this upcoming season. I hope the Kings do the same soon. As far as the Juice Man not ranking on the list of top 20 wingers, my advice to Kempe, not that he needs it from me, is to keep working hard in silence and keep proving them wrong. In our hearts as Kings fans, we truly appreciate Juice's hard work, grit, and amazing playing skills. Just like Kopitar, Juice will be underrated by the rest of the league. Thanks for the shows, Eddie. Go Kings, go, go Reign, go. And that was Ruben in West Covina. I do think Adrian Kempe is underrated. I don't know if it's a West Coast thing or not, but I don't think he gets his due. And I said it on the episode, I'm not sure how he can be ranked in the top 20 last year, lead the Kings in scoring and goals, and not be in the top 20 this season. By the way, I did order my new Ontario Reign purple and gold jersey. Cannot wait to get that. I'll be certainly wearing it on the show during the season. Steve from Moore Park checks in. He says, thank you for helping us get through the dog days of the summer until the Kings puck drops. I've noticed the Kings promos are lacking the last few years. One example, the Dodgers have 24 free bobblehead giveaways versus just one Peanuts bobblehead giveaway last year and this coming season for the Kings. I'm not counting the themed night ticket packs that include one. The Anaheim team that shall not be named has a couple of bobbleheads, but they also have things like mini goalie helmets, skates, and the grudgingly cool mascot mask as giveaways. Is this AEG being cheap, knowing most Kings fans will show up regardless? Also, I have some experience with welfare checks with my son Ryan in Moore Park. Let me know if Ed and Bray needs one, given how odd his last email was. Let's go Mucinex. And that was Steve in Moore Park. I'm sorry, Steve, I didn't get that last reference. Is there like Mucinex night at the Kings game or something? I did glance at the promotional giveaways because I usually go as a member of the media and not as a fan. I don't pay too much attention to that. I mean, I would say maybe not fair to compare it to the Dodgers because, I mean, what do they have? 80-something home games to give away, all those bobbleheads they do. I know I was at a family birthday party recently, and one of my cousins told me about they went to some Dodger game. They had no idea about the giveaway. It was like some kind of Pokemon card. And as soon as they walked in the gate, there were like guys with wads of $100 bills offering them hundreds of dollars for their Pokemon ticket. And their two daughters were like, yes, here, I take it. And they each got like $500 for their Pokemon card. I'm guessing they probably sell it on eBay for twice that much. That was a pretty wild story about a giveaway that I heard. So yeah, I mean, we're Chargers season ticket holders. My wife being the huge Chargers fan, the giveaways they have aren't great either. You think NFL teams would, have some good stuff they give out, but not so much. Brian number 1 in Huntington Beach says, you are now 4 for 4, my friend. Last week, I asked you to name a former King who was considered a selfish loner by his teammates, and it was indeed Dmitry Kristich. But can you name this former King? A center, drafted by the Detroit Red Wings in the second round, 23rd overall of the 1988 NHL supplemental draft for older collegiate hockey players. In 1990, the Red Wings traded him, Jimmy Carson, and Mark Potvin to the LA Kings, Paul Coffey, Sylvain Couturier, and Jim Hiller. Yes, that Jim Hiller. He played parts of 4 seasons for the Kings from 1992 to 1996 and scored a total of 12 goals. However, he is best known for being the unlikely goal scorer of the game-winning double overtime goal in Game 5 of the 1993 Smythe Division Finals against the highly favored Pavel Bure-led Vancouver Canucks. He wore number 14. Can you name this former King? Bonus points if you can name the player who assisted on that game-winning goal. And lastly, with regards to the Kings fan survey, do you think Ken Holland and Luc Robitaille are the best two suited to lead a rebuild? Which GMs are best at rebuilding from the ground up? Thanks for another great week of shows, and sorry for the long email. Go Kings, go. And again, that was from Brian number 1 in Huntington Beach. Well, Brian, I love the trivia question, and I absolutely know the answer because I was a big fan of this player at the time. Little scrappy guy, kind of maybe a Blake Lizotte type, always flying around, big effort guy, not known for scoring goals, was a bottom 6 player. But I remember that goal very well. It was scored against Kirk McLean. The player is Gary Shuchuk. He was right in front of the net, a hardworking goal as you would expect. Who assisted on the goal? No, I cannot help you on that one. So I don't know bonus points, but I'm 5 for 5 because I am 100% sure the answer is Gary Shuchuk. As for your question about the rebuild, I do not believe that Luc Robitaille or Ken Holland are the men that should be in charge if and when the Kings decide for a major retool or a major rebuild. I know Holland won't be around for that. I don't have a lot of confidence, though, that Luc Robitaille won't be around. I don't see any evidence that he is going anywhere anytime soon. As for who you want to bring in to do something like that, honestly, I would love to see, if it comes to that, the Kings going out and getting some hotshot assistant GM from a successful team who's learned under a GM and give him a chance to have fresh ideas with, just completely fresh takes on going about rebuilding the team. Our final email comes from Ed in Brea, and he says, yes, it was Jim Pack. That was the answer to his trivia question last week. He won 2 Stanley Cups with Mario Lemieux and Jaromir Jagr back with Pittsburgh. He was traded off to the Kings with Tomas Sandstrom, only showed up for 18 games for the Kings, now is a head figure in South Korean hockey. My next trivia is a goalie question, since I am one. In Jonathan Quick's debut, he defeated the Sabres 8-2 in Buffalo on December 6, 2007. Who was the backup goalie for that game? That season, the Kings had lots of goalies dressed for them. Just curious if you know that goalie. That's all for this week. Go Kings, go. And that was Ed in Brea. Well, I was very confident in my Jim Pack. So I guess if you want to total it, I'm 6 for 6 in trivia questions. Anyway, I don't know who the backup goalie was for Jonathan Quick's first ever win. I'll take an educated guess and say it was Jonathan Bernier, but I honestly don't know. So that's strictly a shot in the dark. I think an educated guess on my part. Hey, thank you to everyone who took the time to email the show. This fan feedback show is literally not possible without your participation. For you everydayers, those who listen to watch Locked On LA Kings every day, we've got a full week of shows coming up next week. We're going to do another decade of Kings hockey as we recap some Kings history as we count down to the Kings start of their 60th anniversary season. We'll also give you the top 10 list of things to not be excited for the upcoming season for the LA Kings, giving you the flip side of our episode last week that gave you the top 10 things to be excited for. And of course, at the end of next week, we'll have another fan feedback show as well. If you want to get in on that or send me an email for any reason whatsoever, lockedoneddie@gmail.com is the email address. You're always welcome to post your thoughts on each show in the comments section if you're watching on YouTube. We'd love you to stay connected with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.